Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. James Connolly is an artist, chef, nonprofit founder, and documentary film producer with Archer Gray Productions. He co founded the Bubble Foundation, a nonprofit focused on issues of wellness and food insecurity in inner city public schools. The documentary film production team at Archer Gray Productions has produced a variety of films, from Transmilitary, a film that explores equal opportunity and discrimination for the over 15,000 active duty transgender soldiers serving in the military, to Michael Moore's latest documentary, Where to Invade Next, where Moore explores issues like mass incarceration, school food, criminal justice, and student debt. James Connolly is also the producer of the documentaries Sacred Cow and Death in the Garden, and the co producer of the Sustainable Dish podcast. These concepts are where we are focusing on today, as we all grapple with our daily decisions of what to eat to sustain ourselves and our planet, and how we all must come to terms with the simple fact that to maintain and create life, we must accept death. James Connolly, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thanks, Casey. Same, back to you.
So cool to have you. This is such a wide topic. And I have to say, like, deep diving into, food for the last 10, 15 years of my life, being interested in nutrition and being interested in fitness, you would have thought that we could have figured this stuff out by now. How do we feed ourselves? It's like the most basic human thing that we don't seem to really have a grasp on yet. And I was just reflecting yesterday, actually, on two kind of things that happened. So early in the day, I went into Costco. I wanted to just kind of take a trip around and grab my butter and my eggs and whatever. And I just wanted to count, like, how many people in this store right now look like they don't have some type of metabolic disorder, but just vastly obvious don't have metabolic disorder. I counted five. I counted five people in the entire store. There was probably 150, 200 people in the store. Also yesterday, my grandpa turned 92. He rode his bike the day before a little bit longer. He wanted to ride 9 miles that day because he thought as a 92-year-old he probably wouldn't be able to do it, so he might as well do it when he's 91. I don't think my grandpa I don't think my grandpa has ever counted a calorie, paid attention to nutrition, yet he's thriving and kicking ass at 92. And I just contrast those two things, and it's so interesting to see some people seem to have figured it out and other people have no clue. And as a society, we're just going down this terrible path. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that kind of comes to my head is a statistic that there's a documentary that came out during COVID. It's called El Susto, and it's sort of centered around the soda companies and their effect on the obesity epidemic in Mexico. And I think it was a statistic that was outlaid in that, and it made me do a little bit of a deeper dive into it. So the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation spends, I think it's somewhere around like $100 million a year working on obesity, specifically child obesity. The processed food companies spend that by March. Right. And so you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent to sort of obfuscate the role that they have played for a very long time in the obesity epidemic. And your followers are probably very familiar with that. A lot of the Institute for ILSI, the Institute for Life Sciences, that blames the consumer end of that. You haven't moved enough and you just can't control yourself in the most obesogenic environment the world has ever seen. And so I think that, it's a really difficult situation because I think at the end of the day, the consumer ends up blaming themselves. They've tried so many diets. They've tried whatever the fad is. The 20th century could be described as the diet century, right? It sells, diet books sell on par with a lot of the top sellers in the world in terms of books and literature. Everybody's got their idea. Everybody tries to differentiate themselves in many different ways. And whether you're plant-based or you even meat-based carnivore, what you're doing is you're essentially signaling to the world that you're an outlier. And I think Rob Wolf actually said this in Sacred Cow. and I think it's a really profound statement. He said, if you are not obese in this environment, you're doing something wrong, right? Because we've never had foods designed this way. You know, they're hyper palatable. They light up reward centers in the brain. There's a segment in Sacred Cow where they looked at Fruity Pebbles, and they put an ounce of Fruity Pebbles on Fred and Barney's tongue, and it shows it, going up to the head, right, and lighting up all of the reward centers of the brain. So these guys are bragging about the fact that they have, in essence, created this environment. And so the fallout of that is that you get the U.S. military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have all said obesity is a national security issue. We see that with the rise in diabetes rates, everywhere the Western diet is exported to. And then at the end result of that, people are so confused, and they've been told many different things for a very long time, completely schizophrenic ideas. One day, chocolate is good for you. One day it's bad. Coffee is horrible. Salt is bad. Any number of different things are thrown at you all the time. And so what ends up happening is you get that sort of Aldous Huxley, that sort of the war between Orwell and Huxley. So Orwell said in the future that all of media and all of information will come from this one source. And Huxley disagreed with him. He said, they'll just bombard you with so much information, you won't be able to tell what the truth is anymore. And I think that's the environment that we kind of live in nowadays, only exacerbated by social media, by legacy media, any number of different things. I mean, you and I both grew up with watching, say, the 11 o'clock news. This food in your home will be the thing that will kill you. Right?
Totally.
You watch for 45 minutes and then they just tell you it's like peanuts or something like that. And so of course people are confused. And because of the work that I've been doing, especially with Sacred Cow, I get so many people in my direct messages who are going through nutrition and dietetics programs, and they're saying everything that you are talking about is not even brought up. I mean, we're still doing food pyramid stuff. We have curricula that is 20 years old that doesn't follow any of the latest science. And so, you have an entire droves of kids who are graduating from college with through the dietetics program that are working off of really old information. And I think it's really difficult. Now you go into a clinical setting and that person is in essence teaching something that is outdated science as well. And so, for me, the hardest part and the thing that I always try to remind myself of, through these diet wars and the way that people kind of talk about this stuff, is that the end result is the consumer doesn't necessarily know what to do and they're confused out of it. And so when you walk through the supermarket or you walk through the airport and you see people who can no longer walk, they can't even get to the gate. And these are people around our age. I'm 48 years old. And so when you put them in situations where they have to move, what you see is the end result of all of that. And the consumer is blamed, right? It's still one of the only, like, of the 7 deadly sins, it's one of the only ones that can really, you can actually go after the person and say that they're just gluttonous. They can't control themselves, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so crazy. I think back again to that trip at Costco. It wasn't just seeing a lot of big people. It's seeing people on the scooters. It's seeing people, like, with oxygen tanks. One dude was pushing his cart that had the giant oxygen tank in it, like he's a scuba diver. And people are like buckled over. You're right. Like they can't stand upright. They need walkers and canes and all this stuff. And it's so sad. And I think you're absolutely right. We blame the consumer. You mentioned soda. It's on every single soda machine that you see. Balance what you eat, drink, and do. So the consumer thinks, well, great, I'm going to buy, Coca-Cola. Thank goodness they're looking out for me. They're just telling me to go for a walk after this, and they'll be able to balance things out. And again, if I'm the average consumer, I'm the same way. Why don't I just throw in the towel, order Grubhub? It tastes good. I'll just do that and suffer the consequences.
Yeah, and you have two things that kind of happen within the consumer market. You have on the one hand you have a population of people that are that are overworked, overstressed. We go into this in Michael Moore's film. We have the least vacation time in the Western world. We have an entire culture here that says work yourself to death to wait for retirement. Right? And so sacrifice your metabolic health, sacrifice your mental sanity, all of that stuff, because it is a rat race. And so the end result of that is you have an environment where people at the end of the day can no longer control the mechanism by making right choices. And so they've made all of the choices and they're exhausted and they just want something that tastes good. So you have that one element of the diet culture world where you're creating this environment where all of these foods are so absolutely delicious. I can't have Doritos or Oreos in my house, like you know.
No way, not a
Um,
chance.
yeah, and so you have that side, and then you have the other side of it, which is sort of the terror management side. The terror management side is it says ultimately that you are going to age ungracefully. You're going to, any number of different things, and so you can charge people $1,000 for a detox diet that is in essence powdered citric acid and some cayenne pepper, right? You can sell them these supplements that are essentially just worthless, but they will buy into it because they believe that they can create a pure environment in the food that they eat. And so you have these two sort of warring ideas that are kind of constantly, sort of playing off of each other. One is the super wealthy who are always detoxing, always going through all of these different phases of, whatever the latest thing is. It's celery juice or, fresh pressed juices that are $12, and so you have that, or you have Tropicana on the other side, which is in essence powdered concentrate, and a few oranges kind of thrown in. And so you have these two sort of wars that are happening, and you have the consumer in the middle who just has no idea what to do anymore. And so, I saw this when, so me and my partner started a foundation in New York. We were primarily working in inner city schools, and we were working we were at our height, we were teaching about 1,600 kids a week. We would go into the classroom. We would, in essence, kind of do cooking classes in the classroom because we want to create sort of an Italian style understanding of food. Italians don't teach nutrition, right? They just teach you to love food. And so you love like good, rich olive oil, or you have, traditions of eating radicchio during harvest time, and bitter compounds in those foods are considered to be something that you would try because it's part of a festival experience. Tomatoes, any number of different things. So you have this food culture that celebrates food, celebrates tradition. And so we wanted to kind of instill that in school by introducing kids to what is the least percentage of the American diet, which is fresh fruits and vegetables. And so we never really vilified meat that was on the plate. What we did was we wanted to take all the other stuff that was kind of sitting off of it and replace it with really good food. And so we'd start salad bars. We would do within the cafeteria, we would do things where if you think of all of the things that you have a tray in hand, it's like it's schools, it's the military, and it's the prisons. So we wanted to kind of break that cycle and have family style dinners. And so we would kind of like recreate the environment of the cafeteria so the kids fed themselves and they talk about the food and they challenge each other to try new foods. And
Interesting.
we'd overhaul the school food as we were working with that. And what we found was it was actually cost neutral to make food in-house every single day for these kids for 2 to maybe even 3 meals a day based on the population. Because we were working in some of the poorest congressional districts in America. And we found it was cost neutral to have stuff made in-house that was real food. And so we wanted to kind of, and we found that the barrier for change was never the children. It was always as you moved up the ladder in education, you would start to get this sort of glossed over, like, whatever, it's food, we're here to educate people. And so you would kind of talk to them about like micronutrient deficiencies and, living off of like blood sugar highs and how that affects education and all this stuff. And they just couldn't understand it. And so I got more and more frustrated with the nonprofit space because these kids are at the end result of a food system that doesn't allow them to succeed in any way, even though we were doing, amazing work. We were invited to the White House to speak. We do, like we were doing but it just felt like a drop in the bucket. I mean, New York City feeds about 1 million kids a week. And so you can't really educate yourself out of a toxic food environment. And so we started looking into documentaries because we needed a larger sort of like eagle-eye view of what actually happened in the United States, in terms of food and food culture, and how the farming industry and the whole sort of 20th century sort of came into that. And when I found Diana, I found that this was finally somebody who talked about nutrition, who talked about the environment, who talked about real food, 20 years on an organic farm, as a registered dietitian, trying to help people, who then, for the first time, wanted to go into the world of documentary filmmaking because she felt like nobody was really talking about this stuff from like multiple different issues, social justice issues, like legacy of poverty, cycles of poverty, and all of the different things that are kind of happening around the food system that doesn't allow for the outcomes that we would want for our own children and for the future, for our planet. And so, it was so refreshing to find somebody who actually thought about this holistically, that I reached out to her and I was like, I've got to help in some sort of way.
Wow.
And the film was interesting. It's kind of one of those things where, like, why do we have a podcast? Why do we have a book? Why do we have a documentary film? Because this is such a huge issue. I mean, when you talk about civilization, uh, it's all built off of the fact that we can feed ourselves. Everything that we have, from our greatest authors, from Shakespeare to Toni Morrison, to the greatest movie you've ever seen, to all of that, it's built on the foundation of the fact that we can feed ourselves. And so it really comes down to that. And what we're seeing in the early part of the 20th century is the financialization of all of that food, and taking away choice from people, and taking away all of the legacy of tradition and all of this other stuff, in essence, sort of being run by these technocrats who weren't particularly elected, who had an ideological bias against meat, who are now leveraging these huge issues, these global issues that are associated with like ecosystem decline and climate change and all of these different things, who are harnessing all of the messaging around this really important subject that we should be talking about, and using fear and manipulating data and and obfuscating the role of a lot of these fossil fuel companies in order to push an agenda to get people to move away from eating meat. And so I think I think for us it was really important to kind of have that story out there, and to see if we can sort of build upon that to tell a whole new generation of people, especially the younger generation, right?
Yeah.
Who are suffering because of all of the messaging and the shame associated with meat consumption.
Wow. Yeah, no, the thing I loved about the documentary was you walked away feeling like there was some hope. You know what I mean? Like there was something that you could do, or at least at an individual level. And that's why I really appreciated it. And that's why I appreciate Diana's work as well. I'm obviously a supporter wearing her shirt for contributing to the movie early on. But you know, I just felt like it kind of tackled all of those topics that you were mentioning in a really more holistic way, rather than something like, sitting down and watching Game Changers, which you feel like this message, this agenda is getting shoved down your throat. It's a totally different feeling.
Yeah, and look, don't get me started on on vegan documentaries.
So
I
bad.
think if I think it's incumbent upon us to, especially if you want to advocate for me, to realize that when you start to see a lot of these documentaries come out, go to their IMDb page. It's a website sort of associated with film releases, right? And go and look at who produced it. There are generally there is one guy, He is a huge donator to a society called Mercy for Animals, that is a vegan identified anti-livestock industry. He wants to, in essence, sort of end all animal and the entire livestock industry. And so he's made $200 million in the telecom industry, and he's donated all, he said he's going to donate all of his money to, in essence, sort of putting out this media. And they're all funded by this, his name is Greenfield. And so these guys are paying. And one of the things that I find really fascinating about it is that they say, all right, well, we're going to approach it from every subject that people would care about. Your own individual health. Do you care about the planet? Do you want to be an elite athlete? Do you, any number of different things that, in essence, sort of like bring people into that fold, regardless of how they would approach it. We're going to give you a funnel to get you into this idea of plant-based or veganism or anything like that. But really, the agenda is to push back against the livestock industry, and to, in essence, end it. And so you can see that from Impossible Foods. You can see that from Beyond Meat. You can see that there is this whole sort of movement now, the Good Food Institute. So you get these guys who, in essence, have like branded themselves as an environmental organization dedicated to, solving the climate crisis. Really, they're just a food industry, right? They're ultra processed foods. They've functionally moved into this sphere where they've branded themselves as something other than what they actually are. And so what I found really interesting was that you get some of these vegan activists who have been in and around for a very long time, who have now aligned themselves with these multinational corporations, who say that they are sort of shuttling us into this 21st century idea of like the perfect world, right? Vox Media, they call their whole sort of veganism, climate change stuff, future perfect. Right. And so every time somebody tries to sell me on this idea that like they're creating the perfect world, I always get really scared. Especially if they don't, if there's no real pushback. Whenever they get a meeting together, it's always people align with their own thoughts and feelings. Like Diana is one of my favorite people to watch on the panel, where people are not aligned in terms of the way that they view things, right? Maybe it's eat less meat, but better meat, or maybe it's people who are associated with like, the agricultural industry. Because Diana is just like, will raise her hand and she'll be like, no, I don't think that's true, or she'll push back against that stuff. And it makes people really uncomfortable. And one of the things I find really interesting about that is that, we are so used to building these panels now where everybody is in agreement on 98% of what they believe, that even the 2% is like, it's like counting afterwards. It's like, you know what I mean? There's a guy who wrote this really wonderful book. It'll come to me in a second. But he was invited to Davos to kind of speak. And it's called Utopia for Realists. He's a really interesting guy. And he's an economist. And so he's invited to Davos to speak. And he's sitting around at this panel. And he's like, what's really interesting? We're not talking about taxation for billionaires. Is that how can we sit here, talk about climate change, and essentially we're being choked by these billionaires who refuse to pay their fair share in taxes, who fly here on private jets to talk about saving the universe or saving the world. And we cannot talk about, he said, it's like a firefighter convention, but they can't talk about water,
Wow.
And so the best part of it was that for the year afterwards, he tweeted like every couple of months, he'd be like, waiting for my invite to Davos again. They were never going to allow him to speak ever again.
No more Christmas cards from those guys. No Christmas cards. No birthday wishes on Facebook.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit. I do think it's really interesting. Your initial question is, why are we so confused? And you were listening to Belinda Fetke, and You interviewed her yesterday. I just did an interview with her as well. I think there is an ideological bias that really shuttles most of the nutrition information in one direction. It's gotten a grip over environmentalism. It's gotten a grip over many of the aspects of many of issues that I genuinely care about. And so I found this also in the nonprofit sector because I was primarily working with nutrition and dietetic students who were volunteers in my nonprofit who would go and teach. And I always looked at what they were eating for lunch, and it was always just salads, maybe a little bit of cheese, never any meat. And they were coming out of Columbia University, Hunter College, and NYU. And I always questioned, I was like, so you're learning all of this information about like the vitamins and minerals and all of the goodness that is in animal products, even just eggs, and you're actually going against that. Like how is that possible? And we would have discussions about vegetable oil, and you could just see it was totally party line, regardless of what school they went to. Their answers were in essence sort of governed by this ideology that was sort of centered around this curriculum, that was probably at least heavily influenced or monumentally influenced by these industries. And so, when I first started out, everybody's like, well, you should get a master's degree in nutrition. And so I went to NYU for their master's degree program in public health. And I just sat around and I looked at all of these people who were like very like doe-eyed, just ready to start out, like get into it. And then I looked at the snack table and it was just fruit juice and more like, soda and, just junk. All of it was just junk, just everything from concentrate. And then just pretzels and all of this other stuff. Like you couldn't make it through a 2-hour meeting without getting a snack. I was just
Wow.
like, wow, this is so interesting to me. And so, I think what ends up happening, I think, with a lot of these, what I saw was within the nonprofit sector, especially if you're working in food. When we first started out, Michael Pollan's book had just been released. Michelle Obama had just moved her Let's Move program. We had years since '78, we had the obesity epidemic skyrocket. And now, in the beginning of the 21st century, we decided we're going to do something about it. And so, what ended up happening over the course of that period of time was, and I watched this in real time over the course of a decade working in the nonprofit sector, was that we started working with real foods, in essence, pushing for kids to have a non-obesogenic environment, to the idea that plant-based was going to save us. And I kept on raising my hand and I was like, I don't understand where this is coming from. And I had a friend actually give me an internal email from one of the largest banks in the world. And they were talking about the sort of the long-term productivity of the ultra-processed food market, especially sugar. Robert Lustig's book had come out. And so there was this he had close to 3 million views on YouTube, just talking about what fructose was doing to our bodies, but, just sugar in general. And so they started to see what the market was doing and if they could start to downgrade those stocks because it needed to move further away from something else. And then I watched in real time this idea of plant-based kind of move in. And so what the ultra processed food industry is so good at doing is they can take something like margarine, right? This product that was an agricultural byproduct. They could take that and they can add whatever they want into it. Well, extrapolate that to the larger market, right? The larger market always says, well, we can do that to everything, right? Regardless of what it is. And we can lower the sugar content or we can add this type of fat. We can do all of this stuff. So they, in essence, sort of marketed and changed over this idea of ultra processed food to this idea of plant-based. And now plant-based has this sort of golden green color that surrounds everything. And so now margarine is no longer margarine, right? It's plant-based butter. Right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And so you see this and you're just like, you're watching this happen. And then you see these wonks, these like nutrition experts, these people who write for legacy media or anything like that, are just like, they're just going along with it. And so I'm like, quite literally banging my fist against the wall, because I'm like, you're just buying into this idea. Like, plant-based is a marketing term. If you look at the way that they talk about this stuff, if you look at internal dialogue associated with branding and marketing of new foods in supermarkets, they'll tell you what they're doing. They say that they'll take any social justice issue, they'll take any degree of protest, they will take any youth culture, any movement, and they will co-opt it and make it their own. And that's what they did with, in essence, like veganism and plant-based work. And so the original intent behind veganism, I actually think, was pretty admirable. I think that they, even though they were co-opted fairly early on by some degree of zealotry, I actually think their activism brought to light a lot of the horrors of the way that we raise animals. You know, sentient beings who spend their lives suffering primarily to feed us. You know, and but what I never really understood about the vegan movement was why it was that they blamed the consumer for that. You know, when they poll consumers, consumers are generally like over 90% are against factory farming, but they're not necessarily given a choice. And so what you'll hear from a lot of dialogue from vegan activists is like, well, you say you advocate for that, but you're still buying factory farmed meats and everything like that. Um, I don't necessarily know what to do with that, because I don't think, if you look at the regulations on factory farming, how it's set up, and the people that it most benefits, it's not the farmer and it's not the consumer. And so
Interesting.
we're given the illusion that we had a choice and say in that marketing in the decision to house 50,000 chickens, or to put you know, these spaces in North Carolina where you're housing hundreds of pigs and all of that stuff, as if like this was like a democracy and somebody voted for that, you know, just for cheap food. And so we're, again, like, the consumer is blamed at the end result of a marketing or a policy decision that we actually were never invited to be part of, you know. And so for us, it's like the Sacred Cow, the film, we have a generation of kids who are being told climate change is going to change everything. We're whatever the future is, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we also can't give you necessarily like a true vision of what it's going to be. Most of the people who are selling you that vision are selling you this idea that nobody really wants. Like, sit in a cubicle for the rest of your life, you know, like, go online and, you know, fill out reports and, you know, all of that stuff. So you have this generation of kids who want to be outdoors, who want to do something that's meaningful, who have seen the degradation of their environments, and they want to find a way to kind of move around that and create an environment that creates real food that sustains their families and the families around them. And so we wanted to kind of create a film that would talk about that, like, speak to those voices, those kids who are like 20 years old, you know, 18 years old, who don't want to go to school anymore, who don't want to get a master's degree in like whatever it is, you know. They want to spend their life outdoors, and they want to feel like they can fulfill that by creating something better, by planting a seed, the shade of which of a tree, the shade of which they will never sit under. Um, and so that's who we were speaking to with the film, you
Yeah,
know.
and that definitely came across from the feedback you've gotten from the film since it's been released. Do you feel like it's been successful in the sense that you've heard a lot of stories of kids that have kind of changed their opinion on things?
Yeah, and I think, you know, with Death in the Garden, I think we're going to continue to push it even more. Um, I think the overall culture now says that the um, the sort of, and I hate using this word just because uh, it's so layered with conspiracy, like the globalist agenda that is associated with all of this stuff. These multinational corporations that really don't they're not really beholden to any legitimate rule of law anymore. Companies like Unilever and Nestle, who are responsible for even JBS and Cargill, these large multinational groups have sold people on the idea that they were bringing prosperity to the world. And I don't think anybody believes that anymore. And so we're all sort of reacting and reverberating outwards in many different ways to sort of figure that out. And so the idea of local is for some people may seem really strange, right? In this day and age, because what we saw was through COVID, the breakdown in supply chains that are so integral to how we feed ourselves and how we get all the products that we get. Transportation is just such a huge hub. Everything is delivered, right? Nowadays. What we saw is a fundamental breakdown in a lot of those things. And it happened overnight, right? I mean, it happened over a period of months. And so this idea that we were creating through consolidation of all of these different smaller companies into these large multinationals that were supposed to breed efficiency, in essence, sort of created monopolies by which they were no longer were beholden to anything. And that's why you saw baby formula. We saw masks. Every single one of those were supply chain issues that were built off of the structure that told us that they were creating efficiency and sustainability. And I don't think anybody believes that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. This is a big risk. I'm going to ask a really big question, but I think you're the perfect person to ask this question. Can you walk us back through history? We can go as far back as you like to talk about some of maybe the like major inflection points of how we got to this point. Like how are we able to manage our eating fairly well through most of our evolution? Seemingly, we seem to have come out of it okay. To now to be in this spot where we're fighting this crazy uphill battle. How did we get here, and what were some of those steps along the way that you identify, you see when you look back in history?
Yeah. I mean, some of it's sort of interesting. I kind of want to uh, um, it's hard. I don't know if your audience has read Daniel Quinn's work. Daniel Quinn, he was a first time writer. And there was a prize that was given out by Ted Turner for an environmentalist book that would change people's minds about the world. And up to today, it's actually the largest prize that's ever been given for a single piece of literature. And
Interesting.
he was a first time writer. He wrote a book called Ishmael. And it's about what civilization is. And it's about what mother culture is. And it's about this idea that this sort of mythology that we sort of created centered around ourselves. And so I think when we're looking at all of that stuff, we say, all right, well, civilization is this, right? It's what, maybe 0.5%, 0.2% of the entire evolution of the human species.
Right.
And yet we know practically nothing about what occurred before that, right? And so when we talk about human history, really, we're just talking about nothing. We're talking about what we see around us. And one of the mythologies around it is that idea there, right? We've created agriculture. Agriculture has created a world that we see in front of us that is pretty damn impressive, right? It's pretty stunning, what you see in front of you. It was never really designed with humans in mind. You know, uh, One of the things I find kind of interesting about this move towards Belinda Fettke was talking about the blue zone diets. So if you listen to the episode before, she was saying how they extrapolated from these centenarians a diet that they are sort of pushing to all of these different associations and mayors all over the world to push people into this one idea that this diet is the diet of least harm and even the most healthy diet if you wanted to live to the ripe old age of 98. And so one of the things I always found really interesting about that is they actually ignore all of the other parts of what makes that society actually work, right? Right. So community and, and care and, nurturing and respecting elders, like all of that stuff we can just disregard. We're never going to
That's right.
create an environment within a city that actually utilizes all of these basic principles. So you don't work yourself to death. You don't kill yourself to make a paycheck or anything like that. You're just going to take the diet, the one small part of that, and then extrapolate and throw that to the rest of the world. So for me, like the 99.8% of our history, we lived within these semi-egalitarian hunter-gatherer tribes. And so resources were shared. Gatherers would probably bring in, on average, more calories than hunters. But you had these commingled groups that worked, and they worked because they existed for a very long time. They operated within their environment. Agriculture was very different. Agriculture, in essence, builds upon the resources in this finite space, utilizes and exhausts those resources, and then finds a way to move on through conquest and colonialism to a new space. And so throughout history, our history, the history of civilization, we have consequently done that. We Yuval Hari actually talks about this. He said prior to the 20th century, when you would get these sort of guaranteed famines, which would happen periodically, you'd lose about 15% of the population. Now it's less than 1%, and we consider that enormous progress, and we consider it to be a failing of human society if even that 1% starves, right? And we do. I mean, that's an incredible amount of progress. But hunter-gatherers didn't traditionally starve unless there was a chaotic, huge event that would fundamentally upend their society. They weren't starving communities. It became incumbent upon civilization to define those societies as on the edge of starvation all the time. Nasty, brutish, and short their lives were. And so if you think about it from that lens, it actually becomes a really interesting concept, because you're like, all right, well, how do they live and how do we live? And we can see that, you can see extrapolated through all of our culture. Like, who do we consider our heroes? The technocrats, the Bill Gates of the world, the people who are the civilizational equivalent of gods among us, right? They don't exist among us. They don't have to descend to our level. Right? They live in private jets and super yachts and all this other stuff. They are the civilization equivalent of this sort of godlike factor, but it actually descends into our entire culture itself. We are the tribe that went and killed our god, the god of this sort of law of what nature is. Nature says you cannot exist in an environment where you deplete all of its resources.
Right.
And we said, we pulled our finger to God and said, we're going to do that. And so that required us building a civilization that hoarded food. So Daniel Quinn actually talks about, he said, there are really only two cultures that exist today. He said, you can look at all of the things, all of the celebrations, every difference in culture that we have nowadays. He said that there's one culture that doesn't hoard food, and there's another culture that does,
Wow.
And one of the things I find really interesting about that is that as a civilization, we cannot coexist with the one that doesn't hoard food, right?
That's right.
Like every single time we've ever looked at that civilization, we said that they were wrong and that they were somehow a threat to ours. So even Benjamin Franklin talks about this. He said, and this is anecdotal information from one of his some of his writings, but he said when he looked at Native American societies, he always looked at the Western societies, the people who ran away from the Western societies into those tribes. He said he'd never heard of somebody who did the exact opposite.
Wow.
they wouldn't
Wow.
they wouldn't want to do it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and especially women. You think about how repressed and repressive childhood and women's idea of their own rights were all the way up into the 20th century. Um, when they found an alternative, and it may have been barbaric by any measure that was used in the West, they always preferred that.
Wow.
Darwin talks about that in his biographies. They actually stole a number of South American tribesmen, brought them back to the West, and educated them and put them in proper clothes. And they went to deliver them back so that they could proselytize to their community the benefits of civilization. And all they found left was their clothes. They'd immediately
Yeah.
just discarded
Peace
all that
out.
and just
Yeah.
left.
Yeah. Yeah. See ya. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. It's so interesting to look at that. And we do look back and how agriculture started. And to me, it seems like the creation of a commodity is kind of the pinnacle or the linchpin that where I don't know, just the implications of the things that changed from being egalitarian, from being a cooperative group of people. We're not going to take more than we need because why the hell would we? There's no purpose. We don't need a religion. We don't need an army. We don't need land. All of these things are so foreign. But once you have a commodity, all these things start to develop. I mean, you mentioned the book Sapiens does a great job going into all this. And I think most people, they're so entrenched in civilization, they don't know that there could be anything even different.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's very difficult to kind of talk about that stuff because I think he Daniel Quinn will make the analogy, like what he's trying to do is train people to be sort of Martian anthropologists. So you've grown up in a culture completely devoid of civilizational culture, and now you come here and you start to look for the bullshit that our culture, in essence, kind of puts out into the world. And so one of the stories that he tells in one of his other books was there was a sort of landmark event, probably in the early 90s or late 80s, where we had reached a population of about 6 billion people. And somebody had said, well, that's not a really big deal because you could actually give 1 acre to every single one of those people, and then put them into Texas. Like it's actually fairly small. When you think about the globe, you could take 6 billion people and throw them into Texas and give them an acre of land, and they would all live. And so it seems really profound, right? You're like, wow, wow, that's kind of amazing. But he said that the bullshit of that story is that you would still have to terraform the earth in order to feed those people, in order to give them water, to give them all of the basic needs that they require. And that's what civilization is. We are dispersed throughout this planet, but we have, in essence, terraformed this globe to feed ourselves. And one of the bullshit sort of matrix elements of a lot of this stuff is that when you extrapolate that idea to the way that we talk about animal agriculture nowadays, you'll see these sort of one-off stories about Amazon deforestation for cattle production. And so you say, all right, well, we now have to limit or curtail beef consumption all over the world because of what is under Jair Bolsonaro's government in Brazil. They are deforesting the Amazon. And so you extrapolate this and you're like, what? you know, I mean, we have deforested all of Western Europe. We've deforested huge tracts of Russia. 98% of the old growth forests in the United States are gone. Canada as well. Every single part of the Western world has been deforested in many different ways. We are deforesting huge tracts of Indonesia and Western Africa for palm oil production. Any number of different things that are displacing indigenous tribes and doing, incalculable harm to our entire ecosystem. But we're just going to focus on because when we flew a drone over Brazil, we saw some cattle on the ground, and so therefore cattle are the problem, And so, no, it's really difficult, right? So, like you go into Brazil has it's really hard to like pull through all of the strings of what the cattle are doing there. And when you see pictures of those cattle and you see them being exported to the rest of the world, you see what Brazil is trying to do, which is, in essence, use agriculture as a means of uh, wealth accumulation so that they can compete in the world market for the global north, right? And so the Brazilians would be like, fuck you, like, you have already done this, right? Like, think of the slave trade, think about cotton, think about sugar production, think about all of the hundreds of years you've gotten a head start on building this. And now you say, oh, well, we destroyed the planet, so sorry, guys, you can no
Yeah.
longer do that. But then you have to also dig into what is actually happening in the Amazon. So they build these roads, and the roads are to uh, hydroelectric dams. And so once the roads are built, they essentially create these tracks along there that people can then go and annex land. And the land is built for, it's mined for aluminum, for bauxite, for aluminum production. It's mined for gold. It's mined for critical resources for our global landscape of everything. And then at the end of it, it's deforested for um, cattle production, and then eventually it's moved into soy production. And so you're, in essence, sort of taking all that land. Cattle end up becoming a placeholder so that you can lay claim to that land. And we have seen this before through colonialism. It's part of the reason why the West was won, is that there was a notion called terra nullius, which meant that you could take land from indigenous tribes because they weren't actually utilizing the land for production. They were farming the forest. They've been doing it for hundreds of generations, but not in the way that Western agriculture thought of it. And so if it was terra nullius, you can, in essence, sort of control and dominate that land because you're now setting it up for production. Production meant civilization. And so you kind of get into this whole thing. It's like they're just using Western ideas of colonialism and to, in essence, sort of grab for these like large parts of tracts of places in Brazil. But still, like, you can't blame the Brazilians for that because 5% of the country owns like 95% of the land. So this is a
Wow.
legacy of colonialism as well. So you have this small percentage of people, like the Davos people, who are making billions off of the annexation and the cultivation of all of this land. Cargill is in there, JBS is in there. So you have this 1% of people who are utilizing and financializing all of this stuff. And then at the end of the day, you blame Brazilians for that. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
come on, like, we need to have more nuance to this debate. But what ends up happening is then it becomes like, if you eat beef, you're contributing to deforestation. I'm like, you know,
Yeah. It's an enticing message. Again, if we're talking about the consumer, that's a very enticing message. I can't, I'm going to keep my car. I can't really control what some of these big companies are doing. I'm contributing to destroying the planet. But hey, if I choose Impossible Burger, then I'm doing my part. Like it makes you feel kind of warm and fuzzy inside. Like this is the one thing that I can do. And it's hard because it's such a small impact if there is any, and it's probably even worse going that route anyway.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if shame is a good motivator to get anybody to do anything. And again, like, that's part of the reason why we ended up putting those tracks of kids and young farmers at the end of our film, because we want to build a relationship with agriculture that doesn't view it only as a commodity, as a source of extraction, that can build upon all of these resources and knowledge that we've developed over a long period of time to build an infrastructure that brings food to communities, that nourishes them. And so we wanted to sort of give a message to these kids that doesn't shame them into making these choices. And I think that there is, you know, uh, the overarching message now, especially with the massive transfer of wealth that's happened even during COVID. I mean, what are we talking about? 570, what are we at? Um, can't remember it was like $5 trillion, I think, was in wealth was distributed to the 1% during COVID.
Wow. Wow.
So to Bezos, to Elon Musk, to all of these, the taxpayers incentivize these companies to grow. The Department of Energy gives $600 million for Tesla to build its first Tesla factory. It's U.S. taxpayer dollars. So these guys make enormous amounts of money off of leveraging uh, all of our work to build these enormous fortunes. And then at the end, the result of that is we go and we say that these guys are geniuses, and they're shuttling us into this future that only they know about.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
do think people are angry. They don't know what to get angry about, right? Because there's so much complexity to it, and so it becomes really difficult. That's why the messaging works really well for vegan campaigns. Meat is murder. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you can never dive into that stuff enough in order to convince somebody if they've got something like, you know. Um, and so, like for us, Sacred Cow is the beginning of a larger project. We want to talk to policymakers who want to incentivize in the same structure, to incentivize people to be able to get back farms, to get, we have um, it in the 1950s, the percentage of people in America working in agriculture was like close to 50%. Now it's like 1.4,
Right. And
you know?
aging rapidly.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure you're following everything that's happening in with Dutch farmers and English farmers and Australia and these large scale policy decisions that are made by people who have never had to think about where their next paycheck is coming from or where their meal is or anything like that, who are then telling people that they have to cull their herds and destroy their way of life and set up their farms for rewilding and all of this other stuff. um, these protests are pretty insane. India as well, right? um, it's you see these guys driving up in tractors and in essence sort of stopping everything and reminding people that where their food is coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they're righteously angry, to be blamed for climate change. Meanwhile, like, you know, you see like a simple infographic will have like a huge industrial park, right? Bellowing like smog into the sky and for decades, and then you have cows on pasture and we're like suddenly told that this is destroying the
Give me a
environment.
break. No, I
Yeah.
know. Give me a break. There's a little cow pasture. I took a picture of this last year. There was a little cow pasture next to a 5-lane road, and these cows are just like chilling out and eating grass. And like, you tell me what the problem is. You tell me what the problem is. It's not these cows.
Yeah.
I saw a meme recently that was like, okay, why don't you go in your garage with your car, and I'll go in my garage with a cow, and tomorrow morning we'll discuss our results and we'll see what happens. It's crazy.
Yeah, I love
Wow.
Jane. She's great. I ended up
So
meeting
good.
her. This is Jane Buxton from the
Yeah.
Great Plant-Based Con. I ended up meeting up with her in London, and yeah, I mean, we could have talked for hours. There's so
Amazing.
much to unpack here. And I think one of the things that I found that social media has done is built a community like across the globe, right? I mean, you're quite literally like you're talking to uh, an orthopedic surgeon from what did Belinda say? We're a few miles away from the the Antarctica.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I mean, you're talking to people all over the globe who have then found each other to talk about this sort of like true absurdity of all of a lot of these campaigns. And the 7 Day Adventist stuff is something that I haven't worked on nearly as much as Belinda. I'm constantly fascinated with the level, the extent to which she's kind of gone into their effect on sort of pushing a plant-based agenda. But I have studied it for close to 4 years, and you know, I've found on Twitter there are a number of people who are advocates for farming and agriculture who scoff at the idea that this group has had that much of an influence on food. But they won't scoff at Coca-Cola and they won't scoff at Pepsi, which I don't understand. I mean, Nestle is a massive, I mean, incredibly massive company. We have about there's about 14 companies that control 90% of our food nowadays.
Yeah,
14.
something like that. It's crazy.
And so we give allowance to the idea that these companies can control and influence agendas. When Michael Bloomberg tried to institute uh, a a reasonable limit on sugar sweetened beverages in New York City, every single delivery truck for Pepsi came out with a marketing campaign. It's like, they're trying to take away your freedom, you know? And we look at that
Wow.
and we're like, yes, this is what they do. But then you look at a religious institution that actually is telling you what they do, right? Because they actually don't think that it's wrong. So it's not a hidden agenda. They will tell you flat out that they have been integral to the influence of major policy decisions, like
That's right.
that a vegan and vegetarian diet, a well-managed vegan and vegetarian diet, can be safe for what do they say? Safe for people at all ages. Well, I mean, 5 of 9 of those were Seventh-day Adventists
Yeah.
who wrote that policy decision. So how is it? I mean, how do these guys scoff at the idea that this isn't an influence? You know, yeah.
Yeah, it's you see that conflict of interest all the time when you know what to look for. And so again, this is a really big question. I want to know whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about the situation, but systemically, before we get to what we can do on an individual level, systemically, what would need to change to it's such a hard question to ask. What things would need to change for us to get out of this mess as far as like creating better health and better food for people, large scale?
um, yeah, I mean, I know within the Northeast, what I've seen is a real sort of seminal change since when we started the foundation and we started teaching in schools. People demanding truth and clarity in the foods and the products that they buy. Almost did not exist before. The idea of local, the idea of sustainable or regenerative agriculture, all of those things were words that were, even just the organic movement was really starting to get a large sort of push in the early parts of the 21st century. It had been around for a long time. It'd been around since the 70s, but as a real general push, I think people were kind of really starting to look into where their food was coming from. And so what I see now is started to pervade culture in a way that makes me hopeful. People are demanding that when they look into ingredients, that Gatorade doesn't have flame retardants in it, right? Um,
That's a
and it's still
sad
shit.
statement. That you even have to say that is a sad, sad statement.
Or that Subway sandwiches don't have, the dough conditioner they use isn't also the same material they use for yoga mats, right? So that you can have these campaigns by people to get people to really understand that when they look at the ingredients on the back of and they can't pronounce them, and that they can actually elicit disgust. And people are kind of trying to move it as much as possible away from that stuff. Um, so I feel hopeful in that, and because of our work on Death in the Garden, because the two directors for that film are young. They are super super smart. They also um, have rejected so many of the elements of modern day culture, and what mother culture is in essence telling them that they should do. They wanted to create a film that would talk about civilization in a way that would give people who have been brought up in this, from cradle to grave, this idea that this is the only way to live, and sort of retell a story of what humans are. And if we felt like if we can give people the idea that if you tell people a story that makes them live in continuity with the world, they will live that story.
Interesting.
You know, one of the major sort of elements of every large religion, mega religion on this planet, that I find really interesting is that there was always sort of a casting out of uh, from paradise. Um, you know, and so that when you take that story and extrapolate that to what life means when you're cast out and there is an afterlife, or you know, even just in Eastern religions, there's an annihilation, is that this is a temporary place. And so you can do with it as you will. And so I think one of the major elements of a lot of the religions today is that, and when you talk about, say, Seventh-day Adventists or some of these larger major religions, they really do believe this is a purgatorial realm that isn't what real life is.
Yeah.
And I think we have to change that story.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's
Uh,
interesting. So the two hosts actually live about 6 miles away from me here in Salt Lake City.
oh,
They live, yeah, like literally probably two stones throw away from where I spent years growing up, actually. So we're gonna have them
oh
on the
wow,
show as well. And we
okay,
love their message. And it sounds like she grew up here as well and is very much familiar with the religious undertones here in the Salt Lake Valley. Like that is very much part of culture. Is you have this life, you were cast out, you have to act in a certain way, and if you do, you'll go to one of these different levels or gradients of heaven based on, how well you did here. And even if you did very poorly, the best or like the worst heaven is like 1,000 times better than what this is here. And that's
right,
very, very much in the culture.
yeah,
And so that is a challenge to get away from. And it creates this kind of idea that, like, yeah, I'm going to sacrifice my life now for something really grand in the future. And it causes, I think, a lot of issues with people. I see it in mental health in particular, with a lot of people who are really ingrained in that culture. Let's save the question of what can an individual do for last. Why don't we talk a little bit about the work with Death in the Garden? I've really appreciated listening to their podcast and getting to know them, and their amazing and long form interviews are incredible. We'll make sure we tag them in the notes. And
yeah.
like I said, we're going to interview them soon, and so I'm really curious to dive deeper into their story. But tell us how you got involved with those two in particular, and what you guys are trying to share as far as your message.
Yeah, I kind of want to backtrack on what you were saying before, because and then I'll jump into that. I do think one of the major elements that I find really interesting about uh, Mormonism, Seventh Day Adventism, even Catholicism that I was raised under, is so much of it is a denial of self, right? The denial of like your sexuality and the denial of any number of different things, because you're creating this purity complex where character is associated with things that would be natural biological impulses associated with growing up. There are so many sort of elements of that that sort of play out. Mormonism started in the same area in
That's right.
upstate New York,
That's right.
traditionally called the burned over district, because there were so many like apocalyptic cults and strange little societies that sort of got together, and anarchist groups and everything like that. That were looking for a different way to live outside of New York. And so whether it was the Millerites or the Oneida Sex Colony or Mormonism or Seventh-day Adventism, they all seem to have like had this. What is it about the structure of that area up there that makes you like build a religion? I have no
Something's
idea.
in the water. Who knows?
um, but yeah, so what drew me to them was uh, so and Jake will go a little bit more into this story. These were two young people who grew up within a society that tells them that they're like overly indulgent to themselves, that they're narcissistic, that they don't necessarily care about like the things that civilization cares about, and so that in some ways they're sort of opting out of it, and that is a huge fear for people who've sort of like been born and raised in that for a very long time, and they're just trying to find a way to live in this world. And so for them it was a sort of a question of like a lifelong journey of how to do that. And Jake kind of got involved um, a vegan cult in Australia. He watched as his body deteriorated, his sex drive essentially was like just gone. He was and being told over and over again that this is part of the process, a detoxification of all of the animal foods that he had eaten over his life, and the initial euphoria that you feel when you go on a vegan diet that's associated with that, sort of building on this idea of being pulled into a world that's going to teach you how to live with this world, and just watching his whole like body and mind just deteriorate. And so he's still searching for the why, right? Like how and the why to how do you live in this world? And so they're not doctrinal. They are open to new ideas. They are they've traveled all the way up to the Arctic, to places like Turkey, to pastoralist communities all over. They're following what's happening with the Maasai, the displacement of the Maasai in places like Kenya and Tanzania. These traditional pastoralist herdsmen, who have been told that they now have to stop doing what they've done for thousands of years because they're the ones who are destroying the environment. And then lo and behold, a lot of these fortress conservation institutes and stuff like that are finding mineral and mining rights on these ancestral lands, or building, windmill structures and all of that stuff that are horribly displacing the reindeer because they won't eat, and they won't, because of the noise and all of the disruption and stuff like that. And so for us, it's like we we want to kind of use a lot of these stories as a, sort of a preface to understanding how much of our world is sort of institutionalized around these ideas, right? And so if you're watching the film, we don't even know what the film's going to be about yet. We're just following like strings. We're pulling at strings. We have an overarching idea. Maybe Daniel Quinn, maybe like a number of different people who are sort of anthropologists who are trying to understand what our culture is doing to us. Pharmaceutical companies, mental health, like any number of different things. Pull at all of these strings to see if we can create a worldview that would at least give people solace that they're not fucking crazy, right?
Yeah.
There's a really wonderful film. Sorry, I'm gonna just keep on throwing documentaries at you. It's called the Barkley Marathons. Have you ever seen it?
I don't
Um,
know that I have.
so it's this crazy guy who started this marathon, and it's based off of a prison jump. These guys escaped from prison and they tried to get away in like the 60s or something like that. And so you go to his near his home, and he builds this marathon that goes one direction in and around where the prison was. And then you run one way, then you have to run the opposite way. And then the third way, you get to run whichever way you wanted to. But by then it's like nightfall. And in order to prove that you've done the route, you have to pull off these sheets of paper from a book that he's like stapled to it. So there's no actual real route. You're kind of like going through brambles, and like
Wow.
getting cut up and all this other stuff. But there was a guy who was in there who ended up completing it. Like 98% of people don't complete this marathon. And it's just this weird thing. The entrance fee is whatever he feels like he wants that year. So it's like tube socks or like a flannel shirt or anything like that. That's the entry fee. They interviewed this one guy and they asked him why he did it. And he was like, he said, I watched my father work a job that had no intrinsic meaning to him his entire life. I watched him go out and do this every single day, like live for the weekend, do all of that stuff. He waited, and this is the same thing that happened to my father. He waited to retirement to begin his life. And when my father finished retirement, he had 90% blockage in two arteries. He went into the hospital, and then he through a number of things, he spent the next 2 years laid out in bed, and then the rest of his life in a wheelchair. And this is somebody who worked his entire life, worked his butt off his entire life. And so the same thing happened to this Barkley Marathon guy. And he watched his father wait to retirement, and then he had a heart attack like within 3 weeks of retirement. And so he was like, "What is this for? What am I working for? What am I doing?" And so that's the reason why he ended up doing it, which I just find is
Wow.
really interesting. There's so many people who are like, "Wait, this is it? This is what we get? This is the
Yeah.
reward of a life like that is built upon shuttling to a desk every day and working for being some sort of cog in a machine
Yeah.
and never seeing, the results of what you're building, never having like the concrete thing in your hand of like a life's work, so that you can have a heart attack like 2 weeks afterwards, so that you're no longer a burden on our social security system, you know?
Wow.
And so there's so many people who are like, no, I don't want to do
Yeah.
that.
No, totally. This is how I developed a really perverse relationship with the pandemic, actually. And almost like in the back of my mind, wanted it to keep going. We were working for a giant corporation, working in a big box gym that was very competitive. COVID got us out. It put us on unemployment and got us thinking, like, okay, what do we really want from life? And we decided that we could live much smaller. We could start a business. We could work with the people we wanted to work with. And then rather than chasing money, we could get time. We could do things. We could start this podcast. We could have interesting conversations with people and share it for free around the world for anybody to listen. And so it really developed this thing of like, man, like if the pandemic ends, who's going to come knocking at my house to say, okay, idiots, you got to go back to your old job and your old ways. And like, we feel like we found this way to be like, under the grid. Like we're not in the medical system. We're not in the corporate system. We can kind of create our own life. And so it developed a really weird relationship with the pandemic because that's what got us out.
Yeah. And I do think that there is something that interesting that happened with people. So, who, I think, I think if you were following a lot of the wage slavery stuff that was going on with people who no longer wanted to go back to these jobs, we had teenage friends who would like work summers at, say, McDonald's, and McDonald's was giving $100 bonus just to sign up, and we're finally paying like somewhat just, like maybe a 1980s livable wage,
Yeah.
but they had fundamentally changed, and they were still having a hard time getting people. Like if you gave people a chance to stop and really think about what mattered, I don't know if we necessarily see the economic ramifications of that down the road. I think there's most people don't have the time to be able to stop and think, and when they do, they're like, "What the hell am I doing?"
Yeah.
You know, and that's
That
hard
was the
because I
time.
think, yeah, yeah, and I commend you. I mean, that's to really just think about it. Like, what do you want out of life? Like, what do you want at the end of it? Um, so for Jake and Marion, it's like I think it's them just trying. They're incredibly passionate people. They feel what's happening to, say, the Sami people, and they feel what's happening to the Maasai on a deep spiritual level, and they just like they're so disgusted by it. Um, you know, and we all should be, right? I mean, these are people who have lived in continuity with their environment for thousands of years, and they've been put into reservation systems, um, that then tell them this is the limits of where they can go. And now the reservation systems are getting smaller and smaller. And what they're saying is, the Maasai are degrading their environment, or say the Sami people are degrading their environment. But you've, in essence, sort of like shuttled them into these places where they can no longer uh, do anything that would have been considered sustainable. And these are policies that have been going on for, since, I mean, the scramble for Africa, really, the 1870s. And so what you get is you get these colonial institutions that come in, who say, we're going to build an entire world around the three C's: commerce, civilization, and Christianity. The three C's of building that up, and they extract enormous resources from these places. They find mineral and mining rights in places that they consider to be developing countries. Well, why are they poor countries, and you just keep on going into them, right? Like the Congo. Congo has some of the richest cobalt, uh, uh, manganese, copper, and diamonds and gold in the world. and have been, just an incredible colonial legacy of exploitation. Probably one of the first like attempted genocides in was King Leopold II of Belgium, when this individual person owned the Congo, right? Who exploited all of these people, like enforced enslavement for rubber, and for all of these minerals and stuff like that. And he killed 4 million. For the low estimate is 4 million people.
Wow.
Um, and Unilever as well. So Lord Leverhulme, was able to annex a huge part of that for palm oil, and he built a soap empire that is now one of the largest multinational corporations on the planet. So that like British and French people could wipe their asses, and but based off of enormous amounts of exploitation.
Wow.
Um, and there's still like, I mean, you will find these guys at every level of government when you're talking about food policy, with no like, they're not humble at all to their legacy. They've completely rewritten it.
Wow.
And so, I think it's, for Jake and Marion, it's like getting people to really understand like what is happening. And we don't know where the film is going to go. Diana was, we had to pivot very quickly, with our film, when I first came on board, because I think a lot of the health related concerns of meat consumption, had been, sort of at least moving along the sort of LDL hypothesis, the saturated fat hypothesis. All of those things were then sort of reaching a cultural firestorm with Gary Taub's work and Nina Teicholz's work. And so people were starting to look at it and say, well, we can't necessarily say that a meat-free diet is healthier, right? There's more nuance to this conversation. Well, we're just going to pivot to climate change, and we're going to show this, like, even if it wasn't as bad as we said it was, right? But it's still destroying the planet, right?
Yep.
And so we had to pivot like midway through this thing, to talk about like, what is the largest nutrient deficiency in the world? It's iron deficiency,
That's
right?
right.
Any number of like meat related deficiencies, like choline and B12, all of that stuff. How does that affect families? How does it affect people who are like trying to raise children? How does it affect like any number, educational outcomes? All of those things are factored into it. We had to then focus, a majority of our film on the idea that regenerative agriculture and climate change and all this other stuff were being, were an answer to many of the problems that are associated with animal agriculture. Put these animals back on the land. Let them do what they've done, for hundreds of years. Let them put nitrogen back into the soil. Let's utilize their power, to build a harmonious environment by which we can actually feed ourselves real nutritious food.
It's one of those things that, like, it's almost like the most simple answer is almost always the correct one. It's like the Occam's razor thing. Like, don't try to make things more complex when you can think about, how we've evolved. What things did we always have? Big animals that were always building topsoil. Let's just go back to that. So I guess the last question I want to ask you is, on the individual level, what would you want people to take away from this conversation and have for actionable items that would not only, help themselves, help their lives, help their own health, but also contribute in whatever minor or major way to planetary health?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think one is, go meet a farmer. If you can. I mean, if it's possible, start to build relationships with communities outside of the grocery stores, and the big box stores if you can. And this is no way to shame people. I mean, food prices are going up. Meat is also going up as well. Just do the best that you can for your family. I think the reverberation effect of eating a diet that is, our ancestral diet, means that you're probably going to spend a lot less money on medication. You're going to spend a lot less money on doctor's visits and tooth decay and any number of different things associated with that. So, like short term, sacrifices in terms of spending a little bit more on real food, can sometimes turn into long-term savings. And I would say one of the things I'd love to kind of leave people with is like exercise is for me is not about body, it's about the mind. Try to find creative ways to exercise. I love like rock climbing, indoor rock climbing, trail running. Try to incorporate as much as you can of the things that actually provide you with like some degree of solace in this world, like spending time in nature with exercise, in building community. I think all of those things are associated so much more with like just a better life in general. Surround yourself with people who like make you feel good about yourself, who challenge you, do all of that stuff. On a local level, I think that those things will reverberate outwards, and will help you. The environmental argument is just so hard to unpack, but if you can, like, buy the best meat you can afford, even if it's just like eggs from your local farmer or something like that. Small changes, small choices, all of that stuff. You don't have to eat filet mignon anymore. It's like the shittiest cut of meat anyway. Fucking tasteless, you know. I remember it was Christopher McDougall's book, Born to Run. One of the sayings that he had on there was like, "Eat like a poor person," right? So cheap cuts of meat. I love chicken wings. I love. Don't be afraid of fat. Like chicken thighs over chicken breasts. Those are cheaper. The fattier cuts of meat are also going to be so much more satisfying. Like strip steaks and stuff like that are good, but like, no, man, like go for the cheaper cuts, the braisers, the ones that you're going to spend a little bit more time like enveloping flavor around and stuff. You don't always have to eat ribeyes, Sean
That's
Baker.
right. Chuck and brisket and all of these cuts. You're right. They're so
Oh my
much less
God, they're
expensive. They're so
delicious.
good. They're so good. They
Yeah.
take time. They take time.
Yeah.
Like you said, you need to develop flavors, but that's where you get to be involved in that process of time, and you get to realize like this. It makes such a difference to be more involved with your food. At whatever level you are, you can always take a step in that direction, and it's immediately like self-rewarding. It pays you back immediately.
Yeah, I trained as a chef and a butcher. We should definitely do a podcast episode on cooking.
Done.
Because dude, I've like, and I'm not saying like I've hacked it, because obviously like you still have to learn. It's your hands and your mind and your taste buds that you have to like train. But there's so much bullshit in cooking. Oh my God, it's like it's so ridiculous the way that they make this so effete and like untouchable. It's like we could do. I've already done one for a sustainable dish, but it's so interesting to get into it because people like how many people in our generation can't cook? Couldn't roast
Oh,
a chicken,
that's right.
you know?
It's huge. It's a crazy problem for somebody like me as a nutrition coach. It's such a barrier to get past because I'm working with people who don't own chef's knives, like a properly sharpened chef's knife. They don't know how to dice an onion. They don't know the different cuts of meat that they can use and how to use them and utilize the tools. You got to start there. You can't even help somebody to eat healthy if they don't have those skills. So that
Yeah.
sounds fascinating. We would love to have you back on for that.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be a fun
Dude,
one.
that's awesome. Man, that's awesome. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking with you today. You've been so generous with your time. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm looking forward to another one with you in the near future. That would be great. I think that would be a great resource for people. James Connolly, where do you want people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
I'm most active on Instagram. Primate Kitchen is probably where you're going to find me. You can always DM me if you have any questions or anything like that. My followers are excellent. They're really cool, really great people, like really like dedicated to this and stuff like that. You can always put in comments and stuff, and you're going to get information from farmers and nutritionists and all of those people. Really, really great. Twitter, I will use as like a kind of blowing off steam, like just like making the world of like multinationals and vegan activists a little bit uncomfortable.
Nice.
I don't know. I don't
Nice.
understand Twitter. It just triggers me all day long.
Twitter triggers me all day. If I catch myself scrolling on Twitter, I know I'm in trouble. Like, nope, gotta put the phone away. Like, make your
Yeah.
promo post, then leave it. Don't go back.
Yeah, but I would say Primate Kitchen's probably the best way.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Cool.
That's
Well,
great.
thank
We
you
will
so much.
tag those in the show notes. James Connolly, thank you so much. We really appreciate all your work. I know we could have talked for hours and hours and explored so many different outlets, but at the end of this, I'm coming away having learned something, but also am feeling hopeful that yeah, we may not be able to turn the Titanic before it hits that iceberg, but there's things that I can do, and in the meantime, I can make life more enjoyable for myself. And things like you said, like movement and community, are such an important part of this message. So thank you so very much for your work, and thank you for appearing on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Cool. All
Awesome.
right.
And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.